Well, hi. Long time no see. Just kidding. I'm not sure when you're listening to this or watching this, but you're probably doing this around the Christmas season. I hope you've had a wonderful Christmas and a wonderful New Year. I certainly have. Dubai is a pretty cool place to spend Christmas and New Year because on Christmas it's nice and sunny and perfect. And you can go down to the beach and everything's open for Christmas. All the malls are open and all the stores and restaurants are open for Christmas. It's great. It's great. Now, well, Caleb, don't you miss snow and Christmas trees and you know the cozying up in the cold evening with a cup of cocoa? You know what? I just did that right before I left for Dubai. So the day before, 2 days before actually, Pink Firefly and I left for Dubai when we were in Portland, Oregon. It was actually snowing. It was beautiful. It was great. So we had that little experience. In my opinion, you should be able to just go to places. Instead of having the snow come to you when you're not planning on it, or the rain come to you when you're not planning on it, or the scorching heat coming to you when you don't want it, go to those places when you're in the mood. So when you want snow, you go to the snow. When you want rain, if you ever want rain, you go to the rain and then you come back to your perfect weather. If you want scorching fucking heat, you go to the heat and then come back. That's my opinion. Anyway, I digress. This is, of course, Sovereign CEO. I am Caleb Jones. I show people just like you how to create location-independent income, move to a less bad country, or at least create an international plan B, all without spending a lot of money. One of the core concepts that I have taught for a long time, that I've gotten a lot of questions about and also a lot of pushback on, I've written several articles about this. I did an entire video about this, at least one, if not two, is something I call the 2% rule. And basically the 2% rule states this. It says, if something negative has a less than 2% chance of occurring, you literally don't worry about it. You don't even think about it. You proceed as if it's not going to happen because it fucking won't. That's the 2% rule. And the reason I had to establish that rule many years ago, over 10 years ago, I established this rule, is because so many guys were so worried about all kinds of things that I knew had a fraction of 1% chance of occurring. Well, Caleb, if I finger her on the first date, I might get herpes on my finger. Okay. Well, Caleb, if I start my own business, if I start my own consulting business and I make a mistake on my first client, he'll sue me for millions of dollars and destroy my life. Well, Caleb, if I move out of the country, a bunch of banditos will kidnap me and rape me and then harvest my organs. These are all fraction of 1% things. And so I saw so many guys get very nervous about the possibilities of these crazy things happening when these were things that I knew statistically would never occur. So that's why I invented the 2% rule. And I have written a lot about this. I have addressed all the objections I've received on the 2% rule. So if you have any objections or questions, if you are watching this video at any of my video channels, you can click the link on your screen to check out that video where I address those things. If you're listening to the podcast, you go to my YouTube channel at Sovereign CEO and you can watch those videos there. You can also go to my blog at calebjones.com where I have 1 or 2 articles about the 2% rule. I've written a lot about this. I've covered what about this? And does that mean this? And I've covered all the different objections and all the different questions that guys have about this. And I'm about to show you some third-party corroboration on why the 2% rule makes sense and why you should follow it. So about 2 years ago, I read a book that I consider to be one of the best business books I have ever read. That book is called The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. I think Keith Cunningham is a business genius. The rumor is that the quote-unquote rich dad that Robert Kiyosaki talks about is either Keith Cunningham or someone based on Keith Cunningham. That is a rumor. I'm not sure if that's true, but I think that's true. Keith Cunningham is amazing. Now, do I recommend, before I get into the specifics on the 2% rule, do I recommend you read this book, The Road Less Stupid? Maybe. The book is mostly geared toward people like me who already have mature businesses, who already have a large, decent amount of staff and infrastructure, and it's about managing that infrastructure and having an infrastructure. So the majority of the book probably wouldn't apply to someone who's never started a business, although it certainly would help. It would probably not apply to someone who was a one-man show, although it would certainly help. But a lot of that book, if you were in those categories of never having started a business or having a small business where you're the only person involved, a lot of the book will not apply to you, or at least not apply to you yet. It is also a very dense book It's a reasonably difficult book to get through. He throws so much information at you, and it doesn't really follow a logical flow. And he says that at the beginning of the book. He says, look, every chapter can be read in any order you want. There's no order in which you read the chapters other than the first 2 or 3. So it's not something I can just recommend to everyone like I can with books like The E-Myth by Michael Gerber. If you're listening to this content, you need to read The E-Myth. Whether or not you started business or before, it doesn't matter. You need to read The E-Myth. If you're an experienced business owner, if you're an intermediate business owner, if you've never started a business, The E-Myth is one of those books I can recommend no matter what stage you're in. The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham is not quite in that category. So I do recommend it because it is one of the best and most important business books. Just realize that if you are a little new to the path of having your own business, some of that book, a decent percentage of that book will not apply to you, and it's a very dense book. So I recommend it with that proviso. So in one of the many dense chapters that Keith Cunningham has, he has a risk assessment exercise. And I was very surprised to read this exercise. And I'm actually I have it on my screen here. I'm actually going to go through it. I'm going to summarize. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to summarize it. But I think you might find something very interesting hearing this from a person who is far more successful than me, far wealthier than me, far more experienced than me. This guy's been hardcore business owner since, I believe, the 60s, since before I was born. He's an old man today. And strange how he gives pretty much identical advice to the advice I've been giving about the 2% rule. So let's see what he has to say. So this is his risk assessment tool. And he basically says, you write down on a spreadsheet or a piece of paper 4 columns, and you have risk, then you have probability, then you have cost, and then you have controllable. Those are the 4 columns. And then you list all the risks. And so let me go through. I'll actually read some excerpts from the book. Step 1, make a complete list of all the risks specific to your situation, business, or investment. Think about all the things that could go wrong. Okay, great. And he says, it does little sense to think about the 0.01% stuff like a terrorist attack while you're at the Super Bowl next year. The probability is pretty low. But it would make sense to think about someone hacking into your computers with some ransomware. Okay? So literally he says anything that could happen within the realm of possibility. Then he says brainstorming, creativity, suspension of beliefs, and brutal honesty are all crucial to this exercise. A great way to do step 1 is to write down a pre-mortem. You know that a post-mortem is an autopsy to determine how a patient died. A pre-mortem is used before you make a decision to anticipate the problems and their likelihood. Very smart. Okay? Like I said, this guy's a genius. All right. So you make a list of all the risks. That's step 1. Then you go to step 2. Step 2 says, quote, go back to the top of the list of risks you enumerated step 1. Using your best estimate, assign a probability of occurrence. So it gets interesting. A probability of occurrence next to each risk and record this probability in the column marked step number 2. Let's see. The probability of occurrence is expressed as a percentage. For example, if one of the risks you have identified is that interest rates will go up to at least 7% in the next 3 years, and you think the probability of that happening is 40%, then in column 2, next to that risk, write down 40%. Okay? Now, before I get to this, I know I'm going to get some of you math nerds, and you're going to say, but Caleb, how do I know the exact percentage? Because I get this question. How do I know the exact percentage? I might think it's 32%, but what if it's actually 26%? Oh no! Your best guess. Take a deep breath, relax, rest your sphincter, put down your calculator, put down your phone, put down your laptop, deep breath in, deep breath out, and just guess. Your best guess is okay. If it's 2 or 3 or 4 digits off, it's okay. If it's 10 digits off, it's still probably okay. It's okay. Take a deep breath. You don't have to know the exact probability based on, 27 hours of research for every one of these possible risks. Make sense? Okay. Now, here's what he says next. And this is the most interesting part. Matter of fact, when I read this 2 years ago, I thought this was quite interesting, and you're about to find out. Quote, for this exercise, do not worry about risks that have less than a 2% probability of occurring. These are remote risks. And while they might occur, we have bigger fish to fry than the bottom 2%. Sound familiar? Those of you familiar with my content, I have been saying this for 10 years plus. And let me repeat, I've been saying this for 10 years plus. I only read this book 2 years ago. I don't remember when this book was published, probably a while ago, but I read this sight unseen. So great minds sometimes do think alike. Because sometimes people say, well, where did you come up with that 2% figure exactly? I really did sort of pull it out of my ass. It was an educated number. 1% seemed too low. 3 or 4% seemed a little too high. And as I've said before, if you want to change the 2% rule to a 3% rule, that might be okay, probably fine. If you want to make it a 1% rule, might be okay, probably fine. If you make it a 15% rule, I think you're being reckless. If you make it a 0% rule, which is most of you, where you worry about every little thing, right? What if I start a business and a meteor from space hits me in the head? So I better not start a business, that kind of shit. Then you're insane. And I've said this before, if you refuse to take positive action because of a risk that is less than 2%, you are literally behaving like an insane person. And I mean that literally. I can't learn how to drive a car because I might die or I might kill someone in a car accident. Therefore, I should not drive a car. If that is your rationale, you're acting like an insane person. You are. I can't leave my home because if I leave my home, a shooter might come to the mall the day I go to the mall and shoot me and I might die. So therefore, I better stay in my house where I'm safe. You're literally behaving like an insane person when you ignore the 2% rule. The 2% rule brings you into the zone of sanity. So notice the 2% rule isn't a 15% rule. If you have something that I would consider a 7% risk, then just as Mr. Cunningham says in his book, that is a valid thing to address. That's a valid thing to look at. I do this all the time. If I look at something, a possible scenario that is bad, that would cause a problem, and it's 10% probability, that does give me pause. I stop and I sit down and say, okay, how can I get this 10% down to 2%? Or if I can't get the percentage low, usually I can, but if I can't get the percentage lower, how do I get the negative possibility to be less extreme? Instead of my arm gets chopped off, can I get it down to where I just lose the tip of my middle finger? Something like that. I'm exaggerating. You know what I'm saying though. But I don't ignore it. I don't ignore risks that are 5%, 7%, 15%, 20%, 10%. I don't. I ignore them if they're 2% or less. And most of the concerns I get from a lot of you are well under 2%. 2% rule. Sometimes under 1% rule. It's ridiculous. And what's funny about this is a fundamental misunderstanding of statistics. For example, when I say you should wait as long as you possibly can to have children, and I address this actually in the Unchained Man, alphamalebook.com, I actually address this example. Some guys will say, but Caleb, I read a scary article, Caleb, that says that if you wait, men who have babies over the age of 40 have triple the amount of probability of birth defects in their children. Now, here's the problem. The probability of birth defects, I don't remember the exact number, you could read my book, but the exact number is something like 0.002%. So triple of that is 0.006%. So yeah, while technically speaking, mathematically speaking, it is triple, which is a scary sounding word, triple. It's still not only less than 2%, less than 1%. Therefore, you ignore it and proceed. Now, if you're curious, this is kind of irrelevant to the point, but I'll go on with his further steps for his risk assessment exercise. Step 3, quote, for each top 10, let me go back a second. After you've made an educated, realistic guesstimate about the probability, he said it himself. He said what I just said. So let me repeat that. After you make an educated, realistic guesstimate, okay, not exact, not a scientific, but guesstimate, about the probability of each risk occurring, highlight the top 10 highest probability risks, the ones with the highest estimated percentage. The top 10 will be the ones for you to focus on for the remainder of this risk assessment exercise because they are the ones that are most likely to happen. Again, he is not saying make a list of 57 things, 57 possible risks, and then address all 57. Again, that would be an insane person. He's just saying take the top 10. Smart. Exactly. Kind of what I've been saying for years. Step 3, for each of the top 10 risks and only the top 10, decide if the financial cost of that risk, should it occur, is low, 1 to 3, medium, 4 to 7, or high, 8 to 10. Then using your best estimate, assign an estimated cost of occurrence, numerical ranking, low, medium, high, next to each top 10 risk and record this numerical estimate, 1 to 10, in the column marked step 3. A low-cost risk, 1 to 3, is analogous to having a piece of sand in your shoe. It irritates and is not much fun to deal with, but you can still walk and function at 90% capacity. Right. So even if a risk has a high probability of occurring, if the negative ramifications are low, you can also kind of proceed. So here's the example. If I look at the scenario and I determine something is 20% possibility, but the thing that happens or that may happen with a 20% probability is negligible, it's negative but not a big deal, you know what? Again, I proceed. I don't care, especially if the upside is large. And usually for these kinds of scenarios, I'm looking at things with high upsides, or else I wouldn't bother going through this exercise. Does that make sense? I'm not going to do a risk assessment exercise on whether or not to go to Burger King for lunch. I'm not going to do that, okay? Shouldn't do that. But you see my point. I only do these assessments for big decisions. Decisions in my Five Flags life, decisions in my business life, certainly my business life, my financial life, my investments, sometimes decisions in my woman life, although most of my big decisions in that part of my life are kind of done and kind of nailed down. But you get my point. So moving on, a medium risk 4 to 7 is like having a broken leg. Walking is impossible for the short term, but you are still mobile and can function, albeit at much slower pace and with much greater effort than before you broke your leg. With a medium cost risk, the incapacitation is for a limited period of time, but the limp is noticeable and changes the way you play the game. Okay. A high cost risk, 8 to 10, is a total game changer or even death. If this risk occurs, it is a major disruption to the business, train wreck, or worst case, bankruptcy. At a bare minimum, a high cost risk is paralysis that will require years of physical therapy to overcome. Okay? And you will find, I've talked about this before in prior podcasts, you will find these high cost risks, 8 to 10 risks, are rare. It is very rare. One of the techniques that I teach, I've taught this for years, is you ask yourself, I learned this from Brian Tracy, one of my old mentors. You ask yourself, what is the worst case scenario? What's the worst thing that could happen? Absolute worst case, okay? That's the first thing. Then you ask yourself, could I handle that? And usually you will find the answer is, well, yeah, I could handle it. I wouldn't like it, but I can handle it, right? You try this in your relationship. You try to open up your monogamous relationship, okay? And you try to pitch to your girlfriend / wife, you want to hook up with other women. What's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario, absolute worst case scenario, is she says, fuck you, and she throws her cup of water in your face, and she walks out, and she never sees you again. Okay, that's bad. Could you handle that? Yeah. You know how I know you can handle that? That happens to men every day. Women dump men every fucking day, millions of times a day. That's what women are biologically wired to do. So yeah, you can handle it. I didn't say you'd like it, didn't say it'd be good, but you can handle it. All right, moving on to his step 4 for each top 10 risk, and only the top 10. He repeats it because he doesn't want you to be a fucking maniac and terrify yourself with 104 things that could go wrong when the vast majority are low percent risks. Decide if the risk is controllable, 1 to 3, manageable, 4 to 7, or uncontrollable, 8 to 10. Using your best realistic guess, assign an estimated manageability of occurrence numerical ranking, low, medium, high, next to each risk. Skipping ahead, controller risks 1 to 3 are extremely rare because there is very little we can totally control, especially if there is risk attached to it. I have talked about this in my woman content over at Alpha Male 2.0. These guys who say, well, I'm never going to get divorced. She'll never leave me because I'm an alpha male and I know how to manage women and I'm really rich. I make a lot of money, or I'm super good looking. So she'll never do that. No, these are men who are in a fantasy world thinking they can control a woman like they could control a computer or a robot. You can't. Not the way that works. So moving on to what he says, quote, I cannot control whether or not I am in an automobile accident, but I can control how fast I'm driving, if I'm wearing a seatbelt, or if I'm texting while I drive. Again, I will use an Alpha Male 2.0 relationship corollary. You can't control, if you live with a woman or marry a woman, you can't control 100% whether or not she leaves, but you can do things like keep finances separate, have an enforceable prenuptial agreement, make sure you're having sex with other women on a regular basis, et cetera, so forth and so on. You can't control if you go out of business because there's all kinds of external factors that could theoretically wipe out your company. But you can control how much time and effort you spend marketing, the margin of the items in which you are selling, whether or not you're selling to a narrow niche, whether or not you're focused a lot of time on IW work. These are things within your control. See how this works? He's absolutely right. Moving on with his quote. Quote, manageable risks 4 to 7 are risks that I don't have complete control over, but I can influence or manage the likelihood of them happening or the cost if they do happen. And he goes on to describe examples, but I think you understand that. That kind of goes back to what I just said about your business. You have a lot of control over the variables, but not control over all the variables. Quote, uncontrollable risks 8 to 10 are things like the economy, the price of oil, government regulations, interest rates, and the competition. Now, let me talk about that. These are things outside of your control. One of the things I've talked about in my courses is a circle that I draw on the wall. And I say zone of control, which is a small circle. And then outside of that is zone of concern. And too many of you are concerned a lot about shit you can't control, like who the next president or the current president of the United States is or will be. You have no goddamn control over that whatsoever. It doesn't matter who you vote for. It doesn't matter how much political activism you engage in. You have no control over that. So worrying about that means you're an insane person. Unfortunately, that's most of my fellow ex-Americans. I no longer consider myself American, but my country, my ex-country, is full of people who are consumed with things that they can't control. I am consumed with things that I can control. I don't give a fuck about politics, and I've stopped giving a fuck about politics many years ago. You know what I do now? You know where my brain is focused? On things I can control. That's why my life is so fucking great. My focus is on things I control. I have virtually zero focus on things I can't control. A little bit, but hardly any. Matter of fact, the tiny sliver of things I pay attention to that I can't control are things I quote unquote have to because I'm an investor and I have to stay on top of certain things that happen in the world. Other than that, I don't give a fuck. I don't focus on things I can't control, which is why I'm happier than most of you. Most of you are all bent out of shape about what about, COVID jab passports, Caleb? And okay, if they do that, what the hell are you going to do about it? You can't stop that shit. And it may not even happen. Topic for another time. Moving on with the rest of his technique, what he then has you do is develop a chart. And I can't really easily show you this chart, but there's basically how controllable it is and the cost. So the cost is the x-axis, how controllable, manageable, uncontrollable is the y-axis or the bottom axis. Sorry, I didn't graduate college. And you basically map it out and you pay attention to things that you can control. And once you do that, you do 3 things, and I will quote the 3 things. Once identified, our job is threefold. Number 1, shrink each circle by looking for ways to reduce the probability that each risk occurs, right? Right. Number 2, move each circle down the vertical axis by thinking about ways to mitigate the cost of the risk should it occur. I am very good at this. I'm very good at this. Matter of fact, that's one of my strengths. I am really good at mitigating the possible negative costs of these risks should they occur. In my woman life, I do that. If you know my familiar with Alpha Male 2.0 content, in my investment life, in my financial life, in my business life, I have never started a business that didn't make money. I have never lost money in my investment portfolio, literally in my entire life. And I am the only man I personally know who could say that. I'm really good at mitigating possible risks. Number 3, move each circle toward the left by thinking about ways to control or manage the occurrence of the risk. That's pretty tough, in my opinion. But that's one of the things he recommends. So that's it. I could go on and on, but that's his risk assessment. But my point is, this is a man who is much wiser than me, much smarter than me, much more experienced than me in the world of business and life, certainly much more wealthy than me, much higher income than me. This man is my superior in just about every way other than maybe physically, and that's only because he's an old man. And you just heard him, 2% rule. He says, don't even consider risks that are less than 2%. That's just dumb. And if you needed even more evidence to bolster the validity of the 2% rule beyond all the other evidence and arguments and rationality I've given you on this topic, there you go. You just heard it from someone who is far beyond me in just about every way. And he agrees with me. If he was sitting right here, he would say, yes, Caleb, you're right. If it's less than 2%, don't even fucking worry about it. It doesn't matter. This is the important point. It doesn't matter how severe the consequences of the risk is. And I've mentioned that in past videos and podcasts regarding the 2% rule. Well, Caleb, what if it happens? That means I die. What if it means I die? You still ignore it. I plan on skydiving next year, okay, when I turn 50. If something goes wrong with skydiving, what is the negative consequence? I fucking die. Okay, but what are the odds of me having a problem of that level? When you look at skydiving, it's a fraction of 1%. It's a fraction of 1%. So I don't care. I proceed as if it's not even a problem. Most of you are looking at the severity of the risk, the severity of the consequence, instead of the probability of it occurring. And instead, you need to focus on the probability of it occurring. That's part of this risk assessment exercise, to get rational and to assess these things rationally instead of emotionally. If you only look at the consequence, you're evaluating it with your heart. You're not evaluating it with your brain. I'm trying to get you to evaluate these things with your brains so you can be happier, more successful in life. And that's it. I will see you in the next podcast next week. Have fun. Bye.